Rudy's Revelation. Rudy's Revelation.
You're the big man, I think. You're the big man, I think. They cheat.
Google me, bitch! Google me!
Hey everyone, it is Monday, so it's time for the Sunday review of the mainstream media. Welcome everyone. So today we're going to hear from the talking heads, and in particular, Senator Lindsey Graham. And he was on Face the Nation defending the Trump candidacy and trashing Biden's mental acuity and its threat to national security. And I'm going to tear into the Sunday New York Times, showing how the newspaper continually mischaracterizes the facts to mislead the public.
Just listen to experiments and so by the time
But first, let's listen to Lindsey Graham as he sits down with CIA asset Rob Costa.
We go now to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham.
Well, I think most of us are concerned of the national security implications of this debate about President Biden's health. Bernie Sanders' problem with Biden is he's not liberal enough. 70% of the public believes that President Biden's not mentally and physically capable of being president. 70% of the people believe the nation's on the wrong track. Most Democrats are worried about Biden winning the election. I'm worried about Biden being the commander-in-chief for the next 4 months. We're having a meeting with NATO in Washington next week. On October the 7th, Israel's attacked by Hamas. On October the 8th, President Biden gives an interview to the special counsel where they determined him to be a nice man with a bad memory and you couldn't convince a jury he did anything wrong. I want those tapes released. So what I'd like to see is President Biden take a cognitive test. I think everybody going forward in the line of succession should have
former
a
President Trump
neurological
take one
exam
as
on
well?
a regular basis. Yes. This is a wake-up call for the country. We need to make sure that the people who are going to be in the line of succession are capable of being commander-in-chief under dire circumstances. Here's what I worry about: that our allies see a compromised Joe Biden, that our enemies see a compromised Joe Biden, and I'm offended by the idea that he shouldn't take a competency test given all the evidence in front of us. He is not only in denial. This is a dangerous time for the American people to have somebody at the ship, leading the ship of state, who seems to be compromised. So at a minimum, take a competency exam, President Biden and Trump.
How will Trump use power in a second term?
I think he's going to secure the border by using executive action. I think he's going to be a damn good president to right the ship. I think he's going to open up America to oil and gas exploration. I think he's going to undo all the problems created by Biden. The question is, will it be on a revenge tour? He's going to be on a success tour. He's going to get us energy independent. He's going to control our borders. He's going to get our NATO allies to pay more. When he was president of the United States, he had the most secure border in American history. When he was president of the United States, we had Arabs making peace with Israel. When he was president of the United States, we were energy independent. Inflation was down. The best indication of what Trump will do in the future, policy-wise, is what he did in the past. I love a policy debate. You know, senators want some policy debate. Bring it on. The policy of socialism versus the policy of freedom.
Senators,
that's what this is about. But I'm worried right now about the capability of our president to be commander-in-chief. I do believe that the country is at an inflection point. This is the most important election literally in decades, maybe ever. If you want to change the course we're on, you need to go back to President Trump. Policy does matter. I am confident that if he's president of the United States, very quickly we'll get our border under control, we'll become energy independent again, and we'll bolster our allies and we'll put our enemies on their back foot. This is a very dangerous time. I do not believe, I like President Biden, but what I've seen, I am very concerned that this man is not capable of being commander-in-chief for 4 more months. So let's have testing to resolve this debate. Now, I believe, before this is all said and done, that President Biden most likely will be replaced. And Kamala Harris is going to be very vigorous, but she's for the Green New Deal. She's for Medicare for all. She's more like Bernie Sanders on policy.
Well, there you have it. Lindsey Graham on Face the Nation, where CIA asset Rob Costa tried to move the conversation, away from Biden to Trump. But Lindsey Graham stated, if you're just joining me, that he was worried about national security, considering Biden's failing cognitive health. And he even said, as I agree, is not whether or not Biden should run for 2024, but whether or not Biden should continue to serve as president for the next 6 months. So I think that's going to come into question. I just want to take the time now to ask you to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, and share the podcast, most importantly. I have another website, libpop.org, which I'd like you to visit, learn about libertarian populism, and join me live every day on Rumble at around 10 a.m. So let's get into the headlines from the Sunday New York Times today, July 8th, this Monday. All right, first up, we have Biden aides provided questions in advance for his radio interviews. A radio host told CNN that she had received a list of 8 questions to approve before one of the president's interview on Wednesday. Now, the Biden administration came out and said, and they were embarrassed by this, and basically said, we're not going to do that anymore. But you could see, and this is not surprising at all, that Biden, when his ABC interview probably on Friday, received the questions for those. They probably did several takes of each question to make them look presidential, and probably received the debate questions in advance as well, but he didn't have notes for that. So they're trying to make him look more presidential and more with it. But if you looked at some of the other appearances he made over the weekend, you could see he's still failing, and that he's a doddering old man and really shouldn't be serving as president, let alone running in the upcoming presidential election. But most importantly here is this article from the New York Times, which broke today. The New York Times is reporting that the ABC News tweaked its transcript of the intriguing moment in its Friday interview with a president after Biden administration news outlet raised questions, and the headline reads, "Goodest job or good as job." The White House wants a word, and that's the headline. And the reason this is stated the way it is simply because, and I'll just read from the story here, ABC News adjusted its initial transcript of a much discussed moment during President Biden's interview after White House officials told the network that they believed the president's word had been inaccurately rendered, according to several people familiar with the matter. Now, I have a problem with that right away. What does inaccurately rendered mean? Does that just mean in the transcript, or they believe some editing was done with the video? Going back to the article here, the moment occurred toward the end of Mr. Biden's interview when George Stephanopoulos asked the president how he would feel if he stayed in the presidential race and was defeated by former President Donald J. Trump. And he said, "I'll feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can do. That's what this is all about." Now, that was from the transcript. Now, that's not proper English. A person as sitting president should never say, I did the goodest job. But the White House, the administration, wanted to change it because they said what he actually said was Biden said, I did the good as job as I know I can do. That's what it's all about. Well, whether it's goodest job or good as job, those are both, that's both bad English, bad grammar. And it doesn't matter if you put good as in parentheses, and that's what they're trying to make it sound like. Good as, like I did a good as job, like good as I could do, but not spelling it out or saying it correctly. A good as job, they're trying to make it sound like. But if you don't put the quotation marks around good as, then it's still bad grammar. And that just shows toward the end of the interview, and even in a heavily edited, heavily contrived, and planned out interview, that still you have these sort of problems with Biden's speech. Just want to go on a little bit more into this article here, though. By Saturday afternoon, the quote in the network's online transcript had changed slightly. I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the good as job as I know how I can do, that's what it's all about. The network appended an editor's note explaining that the transcript had been updated for clarity. Mr. Biden's actual words at that point during the interview were difficult to make out because he was trailing off and soft and open to some degree of interpretation. ABC Standards team decided to review the audio after receiving queries on Saturday from the White House, along with several news organizations asking whether Mr. Biden had said goodest or good as, according to the person briefed on the network's discussions. Like I said, it doesn't really matter. They're trying to, obviously, the administration has pull with ABC to say it's not goodest, it's good as, either or. Like I said, if good as is not in quotations, to refer to the job, whether it's a goodest job or a good as job, that would be a clarifier. It's still bad. And if you looked at some of his appearances over the weekend, he still looks like a doddering old fool. And this is an ABC interview that wasn't done live. It was taped. It was only 20 minutes long, and it could have been taped probably over several hours for them to cobble something together to make the guy look presidential. So moving on to the other headlines from the Sunday New York Times here. These obscure Democrats could soon become kingmakers. President Biden insisted on Friday that he would stay in the race, but if he decides to step aside, these individuals will determine who leads the ticket. And this is something I've been talking about for years, since Bernie Sanders was screwed out of the presidential race, both in 2016 and 2020, is the rules of party politics state that the party ultimately can make the decision on who the nominee is. Now you're like, hold on, wait a second, it's democracy. What about the primary voters? Well, it's not really about the primary voters. As you've seen in previous elections, the delegates are supposed to side with the majority of primary voters. However, the delegates have the ultimate power. So if the party advises them, particularly local state parties, which is under the umbrella of the greater DNC, mind you, that it's the party that decides how the delegates vote. Now follow me here with this article. Reading from the article here, these are the people who make up the 3,939 delegates to the Democratic National Convention, the DNC. Some are elected and some are selected. Each state party has its own rules for what is normally a ceremonial task, nominating their candidate for president. Ceremonial in the fact that you're supposed to listen to the primary voters and vote accordingly to the majority of primary voters. However, but in the still unlikely scenario in which President Biden steps down as a nominee or is removed, they will suddenly be charged with picking a new nominee at the convention next month. And basically what this is saying is, if the primary nominee for some reason has to drop out, steps aside, or is replaced, or not replaced, is taken off the ticket in any case, the kingmakers, the delegates, particularly super delegates, which they don't talk about in this article. And let me be perfectly clear, in this article from the New York Times, they don't talk about the primary election or primary voters at all. All they talk about is the party and the delegates. So they don't even refer to what the primary voters might want or might not want, or whether they should have a snap primary election and let the voters decide. Democracy, they're going to decide. So the article goes on to say most of these delegates did not set out to become kingmakers in the Democratic Party, but rather to be a pro-Biden slate, pledging support to the president. But in the event that Mr. Biden drops out or replaced, or is removed as president, they would be vaulted from obscurity of extras at a quadrennial television extravaganza, the convention, into a group with the fate of the party and, in many view of Democrats, the future of the country on their shoulders. So, and I just want to go on to one little bit more of this article that you'll definitely understand what's happening. And so it goes on to say, one of the delegates, super delegate actually, he did not want to discuss what he would do as a free delegate if released from his pledged status, which is you're pledged basically for the primary, the person who won the primary. Ideally, and you don't have to. That's what I'm trying to stress here. You don't, as a delegate or super delegate, you don't have to side with the majority of primary voters. Instead, he said he would follow the guidance of Ben Wickler, the chair of the state party. So, again, it is the Democratic Party picking the nominee. And those are the rules. So the super delegates, most in particular, but also the delegates at large, can basically vote however they want to vote. And that's what was fooling with people's heads during the Trump election, and during the 2020 election and what have you, is that people didn't understand how delegates work and how party politics work. They're like, but we had a primary, but that doesn't matter. We didn't have you have a primary, but the delegates don't have to listen to the majority of primary voters. They listen to the party overall. So just keep that in mind. And that's particularly what the WikiLeaks, which has now been scrubbed, the WikiLeaks, the DNC email leaks of John Podesta by Seth Rich to WikiLeaks, that's speculative on my part, mind you, that the WikiLeaks leak pointed out that ultimately the party can decide who the nominee is, and that was the whole hullabaloo with replacing Bernie with Hillary Clinton originally, and the same thing with Biden in 2020 over Bernie Sanders. I'm not going to go into the fact that the DNC head of the DNC was removed over the revelations from those WikiLeaks. A certain Florida congresswoman, who we won't mention here, was responsible. All right, back to the articles here from the New York Times. As Biden digs in, more supporters look to push him out. Interviews with dozens of Democrats illustrate an imminent clash between a defiant president and those who question his ability to win. Many rank-and-file party officials remain supportive. Numerous officials, lawmakers, and strategists in President Biden's own party increasingly see his candidacy as unsustainable, and their private anxieties are slowly but steadily spilling out into the public view. Interviews with 50 Democrats show a growing swath of Democrats now believe by remaining on the ticket, the president jeopardized their ability to maintain a White House and threatening the candidacies up and down the ballot. And I just put that in there. It just states what's obvious. But again, they're not, even in the lead, they're not questioning his mental acuity. They're just saying Democrats don't have confidence. They don't say why they don't have confidence. That he continually shows, despite the ABC article interview, that they still don't have confidence in his ability to lead. And you heard that from Lindsey Graham as well. All right, moving on to another article here from the New York Times, a reintroduction of Kamala Harris. The actual headline in the newspaper here was, Harris emerges from the sidelines as Democrats rethink the ticket. Now, this is the problem here, is that they changed the headline because they don't want to say online that the Democrats are rethinking the ticket. So they're hedging themselves, a reintroduction of Kamala Harris. No, the Democrats are rethinking the presidential ticket for 2024, and Harris emerges from the sidelines. Now it's a reintroduction of Kamala Harris, and then the subhead goes on to say, Vice President Kamala Harris has spent the past year trying to quiet her doubters. Now, with President Biden's candidacy on the line, Democrats are assessing whether she is up to be the nominee. And then the story goes on to basically tout how great she is. Oh, she's great, even though when she ran for president, she didn't even break 2%. And she had been an insurance policy for Biden being removed because she's actually worse than Biden. So it was a slick move by the Biden team and the Biden family to put her in place because that kind of insurance policy against impeachment or other removal from office, because as Republicans have noted, and even Democrats have noted as well, that Kamala would be even worse than Biden. But the story goes on to say, by early this year, around the time the prosecutor called President Biden a well-meaning elderly man with poor memory, Vice President Kamala Harris already knew something had to change. But many Democrats acknowledged that having her at the top of the ticket comes with substantial risks. Her 2020 presidential campaign unraveled swiftly, raising questions about her strength as a candidate. Even Mr. Biden, early in his presidency, described her as a work in progress, and Democrats have expressed concerns at the time that she struggled to convey publicly that she was in command of the issues, which she is not. She doesn't understand. Not only does she not understand complex geopolitical issues, that even if she did, she can't articulate it properly. She has no business really being in politics because she's an idiot. The only way she made it up the ranks for attorney general and on to senator is that she was sucking Democratic dick, particularly Willie Johnson. Willie's Johnson. Is it Willie's Johnson? Anyway, the story goes on to say, still, there are deep reservations among many Democrats in the party, in the Democratic Party about her strength as a candidate. Republicans are already moving fast to discredit her. Kamala Harris is incompetent, says Carolyn Levitt, a spokeswoman for the Trump campaign. She has proven to be the weakest, worst vice president in history, and she has 100% supported Joe Biden in every single disastrous policy that he has implemented over the past 4 years. Mrs. Harris has also faced harsh criticism over immigration, a top concern of voters. Indeed. And then more quotes from the end of this story at the very bottom. VP Kamala Harris' chief responsibility was securing the border, said Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas. He wrote on social media last month, what a disaster Harris is, by far the most unqualified, uninformed, and incompetent vice president in history, echoing what Carolyn Levitt had said. And then there's a quote from Joe Biden on a recent appearance. My name is Joe Biden. I work for Kamala Harris. Mr. Biden told a group in the Rose Garden in May. Oh, this is back in May. I asked her to be my vice president because I knew I needed somebody smarter than me. Well, there you go. Is Kamala Harris smarter than Joe Biden? Even with his mental infirmity, I think not. She is really stupid. And I've never heard an intellectual expression come out of her ever. All right, so enough with that. Let's go on to the next story here for the Sunday New York Times. Crisis, what crisis? Biden rejects Democratic pessimism after last week's devastating debate performance. The president's primetime interview with ABC News was an exercise in not just damage control, but reality control. And they're talking about his denial. So the story goes on to say, all sounds fine in President Biden's world. That devastating debate, just a bad night. Those dismal poll numbers, simply inaccurate. Those gloomy election predictions, the same old doomsayers, wrong again. The Democrats who want him to drop out, question mark. No one has told him that. For Mr. Biden, the crisis seen by so many Democrats who are not on his payroll and some who are is nothing more than another bump in the road, another obstacle to overcome, as he always has. He does not agree that he is slipping as he ages. He does not accept that he is losing to former President Donald J. Trump. He does not believe much of his own party wants him to step aside. They do. He is in denial, and that's what everybody says about that ABC interview. And the article goes on to say that his primetime interview that aired on ABC News on Friday night was an exercise not just in damage control, but reality control. The article goes on to say, you really see a president in denial and in a bubble. Julian Castro, a former housing secretary who ran against Mr. Biden for the Democratic nomination in 2020, said in an interview, you want a president who can honestly and accurately assess his viability. It doesn't matter. He wants to keep the gravy train going, and he knows he can't make millions of dollars if he's not in office, regardless of what his mental acuity is. The fact is they're selling influence, and if there's no influence to sell, they can't make money. What's he going to do? He's going to open a hardware store? There's nothing he can do. What's Hunter going to run for office? What's the brother's name? Fred? Whatever. Oh, that's Trump's brother. James Biden. Is James Biden going to run? No, none of that's going to happen. Now, this next article, before I get into the op-ed pieces from the Sunday New York Times, the next article is disturbing, but I'm trying to give you the facts about this article, which states, in Ukraine, killings of surrendering Russians divide an American-led unit. A German medic said he was so troubled that he confronted his commander. Others boasted about the killings in group chat. Now, in the fog of war, people do things that aren't necessarily approved of in the Geneva Convention. I understand that, and I'm not condoning these types of killings. But what this article maps out, and if you didn't know, that there are Ukrainian forces, specifically the Azov Battalion, that are going around killing Ukrainian citizens who worked with the Russians, and they saw as subversive. So the murders in Bucha that they attributed to the Russians were more than likely Ukrainian death squads going around and looking for subversives, the people they thought were, dealing with the Russians or friendly to the Russians or what have you. So I'm connecting this with that. The fact is that Ukrainians, and there's been footage of Ukrainian soldiers torturing and murdering Russian POWs that are wounded or otherwise infirmed or helpless, what have you. So you have to couple these things together because it's not just an American-led unit, it's the Ukrainians. And I'm not saying the Russians don't do things similar. However, we're talking about the side that the United States is backing. They're backing this military defense, which is really not the case because the ultra-nationalists, Nazis or whatever you want to call them in Ukraine, are the ones that are going around slaughtering Ukrainians, particularly in the East, that either speak Russia or allies of Russia or otherwise connected with the Russian state in any way. So just a brief thing here on this, what the facts are here. The shootings of an unarmed, wounded Russian soldier is one of the several killings that have unsettled Chosen Company, one of the best-known units of international troops fighting on behalf of Ukraine. In the second episode, a Chosen member lobbed a grenade at and killed a surrendering Russian soldier who had raised his hands. Now, this is all disputable anyway, and in the fog of war, hard to say. But I'm cobbling this together with executing and torturing Russian soldiers and I'm not a Russophile. I'm just saying that the people prosecuting the war on the ground, not necessarily the United States Pentagon, the government, but the special intelligence people and the people running special forces, Western special forces in Eastern Ukraine, and the other people fighting in Eastern Ukraine, and they are Americans fighting in Eastern Ukraine, and some of those Americans are special forces or CIA or sheep-dipped folks. It's very complicated to understand how interconnected all these things are. And the people running these units are usually CIA or special forces or both, or clandestine operatives in Eastern Ukraine, and that have been there for some time. And that's one of the reasons Russia invaded, is because the West was flooding Eastern Ukraine with Club of Bern or Western intelligence operatives and special forces. So enough about that. Let's go into the opinion pieces. First up, though, is my unsettling interview with Steve Bannon. This is by David Brooks. The actual headline here in the newspaper, in the physical newspaper, was How Steve Bannon Sees the Future, which is really what the op-ed piece or the opinion piece is. It was an interview with Steve Bannon. If you don't know anything about Steve Bannon, he's really not the Rasputin, but he's really the architect of economic nationalism, which became America First and MAGA. And economic nationalism basically means that American citizens want their tax dollars to repatriate their tax dollars, and they want their tax dollars to stay here and fix domestic problems, and they want the domestic health of the United States to take precedence over anything else the internationalists or globalists want to do. So let's just get into a little bit of the interview. They ran a transcript from this, so let's just look. So James Brooks writes, populists had already racked up, and this is talking about 2016, populists had already racked up some big wins, Brexit in Britain, Trump's victory in 2016, right-wing populists were in power in Hungary and Poland, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party was surging, and the populists were rising across Latin America, Bolsonaro particularly in Brazil. Bannon knew I opposed him in every particular and abhorred much of what he said, but he laid out his grand vision cheerfully, confidently. He didn't seem concerned about old-fashioned conservatives, neocons, rhinos, moderates, and classical liberals like me. David Brooks is a classical liberal? I don't think so. We were destined for the ash heap of history. Populists have scored yet another string of triumphs, and a second Trump victory is possible or even probable in November. David Brooks is an idiot. He is a corporatist rhino who calls himself a classical liberal, which is really a libertarian, and he is not a libertarian, and he is not a new Republican. Certainly, he's not a Tea Party constitutionalist. He's an old corporate minion who talks the corporate oligarchical line of politics constantly. He doesn't have real grasp of the issues because he doesn't understand the undercurrents, the political undercurrents that affect not only America but other places as well. He, like many other people in the media, look at right-wing populists like some sort of resurgence of Nazism, which is National Socialism, mind you, or that somehow that the fascists of Italy, which were a combination of the church, the political movement, and corporatists. That was what fascism was in Italy at that time. So this article goes along to say, what follows is a transcript of the conversation, edited for clarity, bullshit, and length, bullshit, and to remove the F-bombs that Bannon dropped with a machine gun regularity, which should be left in anyway. So he edited the transcript, just like ABC News did. I should emphasize that I wasn't trying to debate Bannon or rebuke his beliefs. I wanted to understand how he sees the current moment. I wanted to understand the global populist surge from the inside. Indeed, it's basically about the hard-won individual liberties and freedoms that most people in the West modeled after the U.S. Constitution, which protects these freedoms. Not so much a battle for democracy. And as I always state, and I'll restate again, democracy is a procedure. It's the casting of the ballot. One man, one vote, fine. But democracy isn't really a form of government. It's a procedure. If you're a democratic republic, that's the way the populace rules. They elect representative leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really a process, not a politic. Anyway. So Bannon goes on to say, I'm not a journalist, I'm not the media, this is a military headquarters for a populist revolt, referring to the war room. We call it an army of the awakened. If you watch this show, you're a foot soldier. We call it an army of the awakened, and that sounds very much like Alex Jones. Anyway, Brooks goes on to say, let's get back to the big narrative. Do you think immigration is a core issue here? That seems to be one of the issues that drives populist support everywhere. Immigration, spending, it's a lack of confidence, of self-loathing, Bannon says, of their own civilization, their own culture. That's a spiritual part that's at the base. Immigration is just a manifestation, a loss of self-confidence. And he's talking about the undermining of the nation-state sovereignty, which he goes on to say. I don't know if I included it here. Let's just go on quickly. Our movement is metastasizing to something that's different than America First. It's American citizens first. What does that mean? It means Americans have to get a better deal. Right now, the American citizen has all the obligations asserted in the military of paying taxes or going through this grind that is the American late-stage techno-feudal capitalism. But tell me where the bonus is, and they didn't put in a question mark there. Like everybody, I've been trying to figure out why populism is having this broad resurgence. Well, David Brooks, the reason is the undermining of the 18th century nation state when, I really should say the 19th century nation state, when kingdoms started falling away and republicanism started replacing that with the nation state as its core, a republic, where the populace governs. And they govern by electing, or in the early stages of the United States, the state legislators selecting senators to represent them on the national level. But in any case, it's a republic who chooses their representatives among the people to serve in government democratically. All right, let's go on, running a little long here. So let's go on to these last couple opinion pieces. Again, going back to the Biden presidency, a guest essay, The Struggles of the President Biden and the Truth About Aging. Reporters of Mr. Biden's biographers have been reflecting over the past week about the severity and nature of his condition, on whether he missed signs or were duped. Who was this woman who wrote this? Katie somebody. The nature of his condition, whether they missed the signs or were duped. They didn't miss the signs, they were duped, because the mainstream media on the left didn't report all the things that we on the right were reporting. Like, look at him here, look at him here, look at his gait, look at him fumbling, look at him, they called it a stutter. So that's, if you're calling it a stutter, they were duped. Oh, this is a cheap fake. They were duped. Duped. They didn't miss the signs. The leftist mainstream media was not broadcasting the outtakes that we saw on the right. Americans are suddenly engaged in a speculative conversation about whether the president is physically and mentally fit to lead the country and whether he can trust his self-assessment. What would it mean for a person to get back up? And they're talking about Biden's speech, who also can't walk, speak, or debate at the ease he once did, and how he makes sense of his appearance at the debate and the stories that have emerged since about his lapses of memory naps during the day, and occasional bouts of confusion, all which have happened. You see him standing on stage, he's like, where am I? Or he falls asleep, or, you know, there's something emotive going on, and he has a blank stare. And then I think the last op-ed piece here is the Supreme Court creates a lawless presidency. Who is this by? Kate Shaw. This is the one by Kate Shaw, excuse me. And the lead goes on, the Supreme Court's radical decision. Oh, by the way, this is a conservative court. Supreme Court's radical decision. Again, the right cannot be radical. They're reactionary. So, and this has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the Constitution. So going back to the story, handing the president, and they talk about Donald Trump, handing the president, the former president you mean, broad immunity from criminal prosecution on Monday will rightly be understood as enormously increasing the power and enormously reducing the accountability of the president. Not true. What it does is what the president always did, is have immunity from pedestrian criminal prosecution at the municipal, state level kind of deal, even from some federal prosecution. The president can be held accountable by being removed from office, so being impeached. Or if he did crimes that were treason, it's high crimes and misdemeanor can be removed from office. That's his penalty. Not afterwards being brought up on criminal charges by the federal, state, or municipal courts. And if the crimes are treasonous, he can be put to death. Plain and simple, by a military tribunal, mind you, because technically it's treason under his role as commander-in-chief. In any case, getting back to the article, in casting aside the text structure and history of the Constitution, wait for it here, in favor of gauzy concerns about the need to safeguard the independence and effective functioning of the executive branch and to enable the president to carry out his constitutional duties without undue caution. But she says, casting aside the text structure and history of the Constitution, and then the justices say, enable the president to carry out his constitutional duties. What? How are you casting aside text structure and history of the Constitution when the justices said to enable the president to carry out his constitutional duties? It doesn't, it's cognitive dissonance. You can't hold those two things together. If the justice is saying for the president to carry out his constitutional duties with undue caution, and then in the same sentence, you say that they were casting aside text structure and history of the Constitution, which your definitions of such are speculative. If you want to put any meaning into that sentence, it's just ridiculous. Nonsensical, idiotic, irrational, stupid, ludicrous, absurd, pathetic, asinine. But, you know, most of these opinion writers for the New York Times are just really stupid. I mean, I could go over all the opinion pieces and pick them apart. They're just done by stupid people. All right, that's it for me today. We're, I think, around 43 minutes, so. I don't want to go too long. Usually Monday is longer because I add a video and then I go at length into the opinion pages and what have you. So thanks for joining me today. Please engage the channel, like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, click the notification bell, leave a comment, get in on the discussion. Don't forget, I'm try to go live every day, Monday through Friday on Rumble at 10 a.m., so join me live. And remember, you're under attack psychologically, biologically, so stay hip to the trick. And I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
Just listen to experiments in ambient soul by the Dynamo. They cheat. You're the big man, I think. You're the big man, I think.
You can't handle the truth.
This is all a conspiracy. Don't you know that it's a conspiracy?